Most cars now are built the quote-unquote smart cars, or they're built like iPhones, basically. Successful founders are the ones who realize that being boring and safe is actually a superpower. By 2029, private wealth in the region is projected to reach about $99 trillion. Office culture in Asia still rewards people for being the last person to leave the desk, right? Not just like a mouthpiece to promote what these companies work on or what they are trying to sell. Being a billionaire is privileged enough, so why don't you use that privilege to speak out, comment on things, and let people know what the truth is?
Mainstream business news loves to focus on the daily highs and lows of the stock market. But beneath those headlines is the actual architecture of the economy, the regulations, the compliance frameworks, and the insurance models that absorb global risk. To answer how financial institutions in the Asia Pacific region navigate this unpredictable world, we are joined by Olivia Tirona. Olivia is a senior journalist at Charlton Media Group and a leading voice for publications like Insurance Asia. From her early days leading the Top 1000 Corporations project in the Philippines to hosting summits for industry leaders across Singapore and Hong Kong today, she has a unique vantage point on the APAC trade landscape. Olivia, welcome to the Journalist Story series.
Thank you so much, Barcelona, and of course the Tracxn team for inviting me over. And I look forward to this interview.
That's really nice. So, Olivia, you wrote about how auto insurers in the Asia Pacific are struggling with the massive costs of repairing high-tech EVs. So, as cars increasingly become computer on wheels, are we heading towards a crisis where everyday EVs become uninsurable?
Well, the biggest issues with electric vehicles is that they aren't built like the old cars anymore. So, as you know, most cars now are built the quote unquote smart cars, or they're built like iPhones, basically. And on an old gas car, if you bump or hit a pole, you just have to fix the bumper. But with an electric vehicle, all the expensive brains or the sensors and the battery are packed right behind that bumper. So a tiny dent that looks like nothing can actually break a $10,000 sensor system. And in places like Southeast Asia, we're buying these cars fast, but we don't have enough repair shops. And, there's not enough resources or materials for that. And because
Hmm.
of that, it's so expensive and complicated to repair that insurance companies are having a hard time insuring these instances or these accidents. And it's a weird situation right now since people are switching to EVs or electric vehicles to save on money on gas. Considering the current Middle East conflict, they're
Yeah.
losing all those savings because their insurance bill is doubling. And
Yes.
if car companies don't actually start making these cars easier to fix, EVs might become a luxury that regular people just can't afford anymore.
Of course, of course. So Olivia, as you mentioned about the recent crisis which is happening around the whole energy sector, what's your take? I mean, as a journalist, as you're writing about it a lot, so what is it heading to? I mean, if you could just tell me in a line or two that what do you think that where is this going or what is this going to result in?
hmm It's very difficult to answer that right now because there's still like an ongoing ceasefire situation, and considering the government leaders involved are still not coming to a certain conclusion, people are still left, hanging in the air. And there's no certainty, and the market is still very much volatile. But, what I can truly observe right now is that businesses are doing everything that they can to either cut on costs or provide incentives for their employees or their staff, because everyone's on the same boat. Everyone is affected, and there's literally no win-win situation unless it comes to a ceasefire.
Yeah. Of course, so ceasefire is going to be the result. I mean, if that starts, then only we can conclude that how is this going to take up. Okay, so you covered the massive dollar 200 billion legacy tech burden in the APAC region in an article. Just try to understand your point of view when you look at 100-year-old banks trying to innovate. How do you track the private funding flows to see if they're genuinely acquiring or they're investing in new tech, or maybe just putting a digital coat of paint on the failing engine?
Hmm. So I mainly track where banks spend their money. Like, are they just making the paint look good, or as you call it, the coat, or are they actually fixing the engine? Most big banks now spend 80% of their tech budget just trying to keep their old slow computers from crashing. That also leaves almost nothing for new ideas. So when these old systems try to connect to modern apps, it creates huge security poles. But I'm more interested in the guts of the bank and how the versus how the app looks on my phone. And in general, the finance industry is doing the best it can to catch up with the new tech. For example, banks and capital markets will face pressures on their budgets to keep the levels of spending on innovation. As you know, financial institutions right now are entering the year competing tech priorities, but only 10% of financial institutions and insurers are seeing significant and measurable return on their AI investments, for example,
Yeah,
despite the billions that they've already, invested in or they've spent on.
got it, got it. Yeah. So from here, I would switch to fintech founders, especially people who are moreover dealing with fintech. So fintech founders love to move fast and break things. But you have highlighted that compliance by design is the ultimate leadership test for digital banks. So at what point does a fintech's obsession with speed become a fatal flaw?
I really like this question actually because I've spent like years having conversations with various industry leaders on the fintech world or the finance world, and there's this move like move fast or break things. But when you're handling people's life savings, you can't really afford to break anything. Like a lot of new digital banks in Asia started out in like safe zones or safe spaces where the rules were easy. Just because they're digital banks, they have very minimal requirements or regulations or licenses. But
Yeah.
now that they're actually growing up and becoming real banks, they're realizing that following the laws or money laundering and security is actually really expensive and slow. The successful founders are the ones who realize that being boring and safe is actually a superpower. And I can recall like one of the CEOs of a fintech company that I met at Cybos Beijing. He was very passionate about speaking this topic because I asked him one simple question, whether he would trade security over speed. And he said so himself, that only a reckless company would value speed more than the other. Because recent recent reports clearly show that nearly half of ASEAN customers or users like you and I report being targeted by financial scams last year. And this was higher than the 31% seen in 2024.
Oh,
Like basically you can have the coolest app in the world, but if you have one security hack,
yeah.
people will pull their money out in a heartbeat. And I always look at the CEO. Are they complaining about the rules or are they actually proud of them? And the ones who stay in business are the ones who realize that trust is actually, more important than speed.
That's interesting, and the facts were really interesting. A massive generational wealth transfer is currently happening in Asia, but you've reported that deep-rooted cultural taboos around that are stalling legacy planning. So maybe is this just a trust gap, a failure of financial products, or maybe a cultural set apart the industry is misreading?
Well, this is very I think this is such a Asian discussion, and I'm pretty sure you can relate because in Asia, we're about to see the biggest handover of wealth in history from parents to kids. As a report said, like by 2029, private wealth in the region is projected to reach about $99 trillion. But there's a huge problem that most Asian families, specifically mine as well, don't want to talk about. It's death. And many families, bringing up a will feels like you're wishing bad luck on your parents. And I'm for certain that I belong to these kind of families. An example, just the other day, is I told my family that one of my close friends and her family availed
Mm.
a burial or a funeral plan as early as now. And
Oh,
it was an actual package that included like the caskets and the spots for where they will, be settled when their time comes. And I was telling my parents that this was so odd, but it was actually genius. My friend is literally just my age. So I was curious. I asked my parents if they have any preferences when the time came, and they simply brushed it off. They didn't want to get into the details at all. And because of that silence, when someone passes away, the money gets basically stuck in court or in the bank for years, and no family member could ever touch that wealth. And it's
yeah,
not about being materialistic at all. It's about being practical and removing the financial burden on our loved ones. And
yeah,
I realize like now most banks are made for or most bank products rather are made for Western families, and it's more centered on the individual. But in Asia, the whole family is involved. If a bank doesn't understand how to talk to, like, let's say your grandma or a patriarch, the kids won't be able to protect their inheritance. So we're also seeing like a very big digital gaps, for example, where parents might have their own crypto or online accounts, but they
yeah.
haven't told their kids the passwords. So we need the finance world to stop acting like robots and actually start acting like family mediators.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what. We have to anyways think about the securing the future of the future generations, and that's something which the society actually fails to understand.
Mm,
And writing about that is really a great thing.
mm,
You frequently highlighted women in financial leadership, which is really very interesting. We are talking about that a lot right now throughout the world. You noted that relying on informal mentorship isn't enough to advance women in insurance. So,
mm.
what is the biggest structural barrier that the Asian financial sector is still refusing to fix?
Well, everyone talks about, well, most of the women that I interviewed talks about the glass ceiling at the top, but I think the real problem is much lower than that. Women often get passed over for, the very first promotion to manager. And
Yeah,
once you miss that, it's really hard to catch up. And the big reason is that office culture in Asia still rewards people for being the last person to leave the desk, right? And
yes,
to be frank, I know there are still a lot of companies out there not fulfilling the quote unquote work life balance that they promise their colleagues or their employees. And that's a huge barrier for anyone who needs life outside work, especially for women in the workforce overall. If you think about it, women are the primary carers and financial decision makers in the household. And there was literally a recent survey that said an example of this is how Hong Kong women had the strongest household financial decision making role across six surveyed Asian countries or markets, and nearly half of them say they were the sole decision makers for long term investment and financial planning. Now, as a journalist, I tried to change this by interviewing women as experts on things like tech or math, and not just women in business stories. Not just talk about, their challenges, their journeys through the ladder, but I genuinely want to know what their strategy is without the labels in mind. So we need to show that they are the ones with the answers, not just like a diversity checkbox.
that's really insightful. Uh, you spoke something about Hong Kong when you mentioned some statistics right now. I happen to have a question on that. So, in Hong Kong, rather, I would say worldwide, we're talking about cybersecurity a lot, especially in Southeast Asian nations. So, you covered emerging macro risks from GPS spoofing in global shipping to stricter new cybersecurity laws in Hong Kong. So, as a journalist, how do you analyze an industry that is being forced to underwrite risks that are completely invisible?
Well, a topical example for this question is the current conflict in the Middle East. It shows
Okay.
how these risks suddenly become real. Like right now, we are seeing a massive GPS spoofing in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea, according to like a recent BBC article. And ships and even commercial airplanes are seeing their navigation systems place them hundreds of miles away from their actual location because of electronic warfare. There's no history book for this yet, but I have to talk to certain people in the front lines, like ship captains and those navigating the Suez Canal, just to understand how you even begin to insure a ship that can't trust its own sensors. But we're also seeing this tension in new laws, like the cybersecurity rules in Hong Kong that are getting much stricter. And it's forcing every company to rethink their digital safety. A company might have an old insurance policy that covers physical fires, but that doesn't even mention the word computer.
Yeah.
So if, let's say, a hack causes a fire at their warehouse, are they covered? Often they think they are, but they aren't. They really aren't. So it's more of in the fine print.
I do get it. So, Olivia, having in this field for quite a long time now, and you're writing a lot about insurance. So, how has AI played a role in insurance sector? How has it helped you? Is it helping you more in getting a lot of data, getting a lot of research done, or maybe on the other angle, it has actually reduced the emotional quotient in your writings?
Hmm.
So, just want to know your view on this.
Well, if I were to just talk about like the industry's move in general, what I've observed is that AI has been explicitly been used to, let's say, to compare other insurance policies to other policies that are in the market. And I think
Yeah.
currently there's something going on with chat gpt. I haven't read too much into it, but I know that chat gpt is currently doing like a comparison platform where where you enter like your queries or your details, and then it helps you find the correct or the appropriate insurance policy. I've also seen like certain insurers use AI to incorporate them in their chatbots, and it helps them with customer service. It helps them assist whether this customer needs what type of claims that they are trying to file, and it identifies whether the documents that they're submitting for those claims are actually valid or are they faked. Um, as a journalist, it's very helpful. Like AI has been like a very assistive tool, but it's not something that I've heavily relied on. So it's both, as what my boss would call it, AI needs your eye. So you can't just rely solely on the tool itself, but it really comes hand in hand with human effort.
So I got a tagline from here: AI needs an eye.
Yes,
That's really
yes.
interesting.
I'm glad to
Yes.
have passed that on. Thank you.
So you've hosted major summits for both public and private sectors across Asia. So when
Mm.
you step off stage, what is the one question industry leaders ask you behind the scenes that they are too afraid to ask during the panel?
Mm. Um, Thinking about this question, I tried to sound technical or tried to sound serious about it, but I just wanted to, be more authentic about this question.
Yeah.
And one question that I often hear or they're too afraid to ask during the panel is, did I make sense? And that somehow refreshes me, because when I get to host these events, I get, imposter syndrome all the time. Just imagine being in a room with at least 250 attendees, and at least five of them are CEOs or C-level executives. And them asking for reassurance is actually humbling. And as a journalist, I still feel small because I'm just a writer who's curious about their business, about their decisions, or about the regulations that they're trying to push for. And these big companies are literally what make the economy move. So they're just not, they're just not business people. They're actually people who make money, who make the world go around, basically. And despite being a business journalist, I'm not just like a mouthpiece to promote what these companies work on or what they are trying to sell. Majority of it is still investigative work. We talk about issues and the real industry risks. And that's what most off-stage conversations sound like. The C-level executives or the CEOs are curious to know from a customer
Mhm.
perspective how their products or services are deemed and how they sound like. And my job is to tell them the truth. I see myself like a bridge, taking the private fears of the CEOs and the goals of the government, and hopefully help them actually talk to each other.
Interesting, interesting. So, Olivia, it's time for a fun segment. We actually call it off the record. It's actually a quick fire round, diving into the raw, unedited, and often chaotic reality of life behind the scenes of journalism. So here we go. This or that, getting a no comment from a billionaire or a 20-page PR statement from a regulator.
Um, I think I'd prefer the no comment from a billionaire because no comment is still a comment, and being a billionaire is privileged enough. So why don't you use that privilege to speak out, comment on things, and let people know what the truth is?
What is the very first thing you look at when you open a company's annual report?
Hmm. Well, after years of actually studying financial reports, I think the best part is going through the notes, which is at the towards the end of the documents. Oftentimes, you would actually find the nitty gritty details and where the company is getting their other income is from. So you get to find out like, oh, they're actually not just making profits out of selling properties. They're also making profits out of rent in malls or etc. Like it's really interesting.
Okay. What is the most underrated skill you learned as a marketing intern that helps you deconstruct corporate PR today?
Mhm. I think when I was a marketing intern, the best skill I got from that I apply now is being able to nitpick the information, what is necessary and what is not necessary, because a lot of it is just, quote unquote PR fluff. So they could write a 100-word introduction to the press release, but the actual details are wedged between the lines.
Yeah. Okay. This or that, covering a boring but vital policy change or hosting a glamorous but empty tech launch.
The policy change, because even if it's boring, um, there are still a lot of constituents that will be affected by that policy.
Okay. An interesting question. So, if not journalism, then what?
If not journalism, um, I would probably be into veterinary medicine because other than writing, I have a strong passion for animals. Um, but yeah, I still chose journalism because my parents actually made this decision for me, and I'm very glad that I followed them. So that's it.
Interesting. Okay. So, to the audience, maybe just wanted to get some, advices or some interesting facts from you. You started your career at Business World as a researcher, handling massive data sets before becoming a senior journalist.
Mm.
So, for young reporters entering B2B and financial trade journalism today, just wanted to understand what would be that master advice you would give them when which would be helpful for them, or maybe they would be using it to write that the best headline to attract the audience.
Mhm. Well, I think the best advice I could give is data is not just something for business journalism strictly or financial journalism. I really think that data is a strong foundation for a good report or a good news report. It really helps visualize, it helps the story become stronger. And if you know these skills, like if you know how to read financial reports or if you know how to read data sets, you would be able to find different angles and not just, strictly sticking to the press release, because a company might say that they grew 300%, but that could have been like, it could mean that they were at a loss in the previous year, or like the government could report like the gross domestic product grew for the third month in a row, or the third quarter in a row rather. um but that doesn't mean that it surpassed the biggest growth rate 10 years ago. So we have it like it there are various angles you could see through it, and that's where this true storytelling and true imaginative or creative writing comes through.
That's really insightful. Through this series, we spotlight those who amplify the voices of others across communities, sectors, and the stories that shape our world. Because storytellers too have stories worth hearing. Thank you so much, Olivia, for joining us today. The whole conversation was really insightful.
Thank you so much again, Barcelona, for having me, and to Tracxn for featuring me in this wonderful series. And I look forward to many more collaborations.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Have a great day ahead.